The early morning air was crisp when Rachel Monroe loaded the last of the supplies into her SUV. Her 11-year-old daughter, Emily, clutched a worn-out sketchbook in one hand and a fishing rod in the other. This was their first trip together in nearly a year, a much-needed escape after a long string of personal hardships. Rachel had recently lost her job as a librarian, and Emily had been struggling at school following a messy custody battle. The trip to Red Pine Lake was Rachel's way of pressing a reset button for both of them. The lake was tucked deep within the Pinewood Wilderness Reserve, a rarely visited area that locals said was beautiful but cursed. Rachel had rented a small, isolated cabin on the northern edge of the lake, accessible only by kayak or a rugged off-road trail. No cell service, no Wi-Fi, just trees, water, and silence. Rachel left a brief voicemail to her sister before they departed. "We just need some space. I'll call you in a few days when we're back." That was the last time anyone heard her voice. Park rangers later confirmed that Rachel signed into the reserve's trail register on April 16, but there were no entries after that. A fellow camper claimed he saw a woman matching Rachel's description paddling across the lake with a young girl in a red jacket. They waved, he waved back. Everything seemed normal. But when rangers conducted their routine patrol 3 days later, they found Rachel's SUV still parked in the same spot. That's when the first threads of panic began to form. A search party was assembled within 24 hours. A partially submerged kayak was found tangled in lake reeds on the far side of the water, flipped upside down. Nearby, a plastic tackle box floated, eerily still. Rachel's purse was still inside. Her cell phone dead was discovered, wrapped in a Ziploc bag in the back compartment of the kayak. But no signs of Rachel. No signs of Emily. No life jackets. No footprints along the shoreline. No drag marks. No torn clothing. It was as if mother and daughter had simply melted into the lake. Despite a week of intense searching, boats, divers, helicopters, and search dogs, nothing else was found. The lake itself was 90 feet deep in places, and known for its sudden drop-offs and frigid temperatures. Authorities began leaning toward the theory that they had drowned in a tragic accident. By the end of the month, the search was officially scaled back, and Rachel and Emily were listed as presumed deceased. But something didn't sit right with everyone, especially Rachel's ex-husband, who had a chilling suspicion no one wanted to hear. When word of Rachel and Emily's disappearance spread, the entire county was stunned. Red Pine Lake wasn't a typical tourist destination. It was isolated, surrounded by dense pine forest, and known more to seasoned outdoorsmen than families. The thought of a mother and child vanishing without a trace ignited both sympathy and speculation. The local sheriff's department immediately launched an official search and rescue SAR operation. But the conditions were challenging. The lake was unpredictable and spring temperatures swung wildly, and sudden snow flurries still crept down from the mountains. Search teams found the overturned kayak roughly 200 yards from the cabin, lodged between boulders in shallow water. Despite visible signs of disturbance, drag marks in the mud, broken reeds, and scattered fishing supplies, there were no footprints, no trails, no evidence of struggle. The ground around the area was damp but unmarked, almost as if whatever happened had occurred midwater and ended without a trace. Emily's small red fishing rod was discovered nearby, its lines still intact but tangled around a tree branch, adding another layer of confusion. As the hours stretched into days, helicopters scanned the woods with thermal cameras, boats trawled the lake with sonar, and divers scoured the lake bed, but neither of the bodies surfaced. The water was cold enough to preserve remains, but still, nothing emerged. Some experts quietly mentioned an unsettling truth: it's rare for both bodies to completely vanish in a freshwater environment, especially when life jackets were supposedly on board. That fact alone made some SAR veterans raise eyebrows behind closed doors. Rumors began to swirl in the nearby town of Ashton Ridge. People whispered about the old disappearances, unofficial accounts from decades past involving campers who'd vanished near Red Pine Lake without explanation. Some chalked it up to wildlife. Others blamed the terrain. But a few locals spoke of a pulling force, a superstition that the lake had moods, that it kept what it wanted. These tales were often dismissed by police, but the sudden silence from Rachel and Emily gave them new fuel. It wasn't long before theories became more outlandish: kidnapping, cult activity, even something paranormal. Despite increasing pressure from the public, the official conclusion leaned toward accidental drowning. On April 30th, just 2 weeks after they were last seen, the Monroe case was quietly closed as a non-criminal incident. Rachel's sister held a small lakeside vigil, placing a photo of Emily next to a floating wreath. But in private, Rachel's ex-husband, Mark, told reporters he wasn't convinced. Rachel didn't just vanish. She wouldn't let Emily out of her sight. If they were gone, someone did this. Or something else was out there. His words would haunt the town long after the flowers wilted. While the official investigation labeled it a tragic accident, Mark Ellison, Rachel's ex-husband and Emily's father, couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that something was terribly wrong. He hadn't spoken to Rachel much in the months before the trip they shared custody of Emily, but tensions remained high after their divorce. Still, Mark knew Rachel better than most. She wasn't impulsive, he told detectives. She was careful, always thinking 3 steps ahead, especially when it came to Emily. There's no way she would have gone out on that water if the weather was bad, or something felt off. Mark started his own timeline, going over every small detail. Rachel had told him about the trip weeks before, mentioning it in passing during a drive. He remembered her saying they'd be totally off-grid for a few days. At the time, it hadn't raised any red flags. But now, the idea of her willingly going somewhere without any way to contact the outside world seemed unlike her. He started digging, requesting photos from the ranger station, asking for the official reports, even speaking to volunteers who'd participated in the search. What he found only deepened the mystery. According to park records, Rachel had signed the trail ledger alone. There was no second name, no mention of Emily. That seemed strange. Why wouldn't a protective mother register her daughter's name? Even more unsettling, the cabin Rachel had rented had no sign of occupation, no food wrappers, no bedding disturbed, no logs in the fireplace. It looked as though no one had ever arrived, that the kayak was found miles away on the lake, filled with her personal items. Mark pressed investigators about these inconsistencies, but they shrugged it off as an oversight or fatigue from stress. To Mark, it smelled like negligence or worse. A cover-up. He began to suspect someone had been watching Rachel, someone who knew how to strike without leaving a trace. Weeks before the trip, Rachel had mentioned to him that she felt off, like she was being followed. At the time, Mark had brushed it off as stress, but now it haunted him. He reached out to her close friend, Lisa, who reluctantly confessed that Rachel had grown paranoid after receiving a series of anonymous texts. They were vague, threatening, and always sent late at night. She never reported them to the police, afraid it would stir more custody drama, but she did tell Lisa she was thinking of going away for a while. Mark took that as confirmation that something darker had been unfolding behind the scenes. She wasn't running from life, he told a local journalist. She was running from something or someone. But without hard evidence, his theories were dismissed as grief-driven speculation. Authorities were ready to close the book on Rachel and Emily, but Mark wasn't. He believed the lake was hiding something, and someone else was making sure it stayed hidden. 8 months had passed since Rachel and Emily were declared dead. Winter had frozen Red Pine Lake into a mirror of ice, silencing all rumors and washing away what little hope remained. Locals had stopped talking. The media had moved on. The case file gathered dust on a shelf in the Ashton Ridge Sheriff's Office. And then, on a bitter cold morning in December, a man named Carl Whitaker, a retired trucker and weekend ice fisherman, unknowingly reignited the nightmare. Carl had been fishing the lake for years, always choosing the quiet southern edge, far from the tourist trails. It was a place he called his thinking spot. On that day, with snowflakes falling and wind whipping across the ice, he noticed something odd beneath the frozen surface, a flash of color, maybe red, trapped a few feet down. Thinking it might be litter or a lost lure, Carl cracked open the ice with his auger. What he pulled up made his stomach turn. It wasn't a lure. It was a child's jacket, stiff with ice and time. The jacket was unmistakably Emily's, a red puffer coat with hand-stitched initials on the tag, EM. But that wasn't the most disturbing part. Tucked inside one of the zippered pockets, wrapped in plastic, was a Polaroid photo. The picture showed a frightened Emily, sitting in what looked like a dark concrete room, holding a cardboard sign with jagged, childlike handwriting, "Help us." Her eyes were swollen, her lips cracked, and behind her, just out of focus, was what looked like a hand gripping her shoulder, but no face was visible. Carl immediately reported the discovery to the police. For the first time in months, the case was reopened. Investigators cordoned off the area and began drilling deeper into the ice. What they uncovered was more alarming than anyone could have predicted. Just beneath the southern edge of the lake was an old stormwater outlet, overgrown and iced shut. No one had ever searched that section. It had been overlooked, labeled non-essential terrain in the original maps. But now, it was at the center of a chilling new investigation. The storm drain led to a narrow tunnel system, dark, freezing, and half-flooded. Searchers had to crawl through parts of it, battling claustrophobia and pitch blackness. 40 feet in, they discovered what could only be described as a makeshift bunker, carved crudely into the earth and reinforced with scrap metal. Inside were 2 moldy sleeping bags, a few empty food cans, water bottles, and a camping lantern. On one wall, scratched into the concrete with what looked like a nail, were the words, "We're still here." But there was no one inside. No Rachel, no Emily, just a haunting absence that felt more terrifying than any body ever could. The entrance to the storm drain had nearly frozen shut from months of snowmelt and neglect. But once authorities cleared the passage and powered lights through the tunnel, what they found defied explanation. The space was cramped, musty, and silent, a narrow subterranean chamber that could only be accessed by crawling through ice-cold muck and bending under twisted pipes. But once inside, the investigators realized they were standing in what appeared to be a makeshift living space, crafted deliberately, not accidentally. Someone had taken their time building this place. And someone had been living in it. The bunker was just large enough for 2 people to sleep, barely. Mold-covered sleeping bags were crumpled in the corners. On the floor lay the remains of a burned-out candle and a stack of canned food, most of it expired. Some opened, some untouched. There were 2 water jugs, an old camping lantern with dead batteries, and a child's sock with cartoon stars on it. A heavy, rusted metal lock sat broken in a corner, like it had been snapped with brute force or deliberate intent. But there were no signs of a struggle. No signs of recent exit. Just cold. And silence. What disturbed the investigators the most wasn't the objects, it was the drawings. Dozens of them, torn from Emily's sketchbook, were pinned to the walls, using bits of wire. The drawings showed a girl and a woman, sometimes standing together, sometimes apart. One showed them in a dark room with no windows. Another showed them both lying down with shadows standing over them. But the most chilling illustration depicted a figure in the doorway, a tall, faceless man, drawn entirely in black ink. Around him were red scribbles, like blood or flames, covering the rest of the page. Below it, in the same hand, was written, "He comes at night." Investigators also found something that hadn't been mentioned publicly, a cheap camcorder, half buried beneath a pile of cloth. When reviewed, the footage inside would later confirm the unthinkable, a series of short, shaky clips, filmed entirely in the dark. In one, Rachel is heard whispering urgently to Emily, telling her to stay quiet. In another, Emily speaks into the lens with tears in her eyes, saying, "He said we're not allowed to leave." Then, a sound, a door, a metallic clank, and the footage cuts out. Whoever was behind the camera had erased most of the memory card, but fragments survived, and what they showed changed everything. That evidence alone shattered the theory that Rachel and Emily had simply drowned. It suggested that they were being held, that someone had planned this, and had used the remote lake as cover for a kidnapping. But how had they gotten here without being seen? And who had built the shelter? There were no fingerprints, no hair samples, no DNA, just signs of controlled isolation, as if Rachel and Emily had lived like ghosts beneath the surface of the lake, unseen by the world above. And now, they were gone again. The recovered camcorder was old, dusty, scratched, and missing its battery cover. Investigators were skeptical it would yield anything useful, but when forensic techs powered it up with a replacement battery and managed to extract the remaining data, what they found sent chills through the entire team. Only 3 video files were still intact. The rest had either been deleted or corrupted, beyond recovery. Still, those 3 clips offered a glimpse into the final days of Rachel and Emily's time underground and, perhaps, into the mind of whoever had put them there. The first video was short, less than a minute. It showed Emily, her face partially lit by the flickering beam of a dying flashlight. She was wrapped in a blanket, her cheeks hollow and pale, and her voice trembling. "He comes at night," she whispered, eyes darting to something off camera. "He doesn't talk, he just watches." Behind her, barely audible, was the sound of someone crying, Rachel, maybe, and something else, a sharp, metallic dragging noise echoing from what sounded like the far end of the shelter. The camera cut out before anything more could be seen. The second clip was even more disturbing. The camera had been placed on the floor, angled upward toward a concrete wall. Rachel was in the frame this time, hunched over, whispering directly to the camera. "Please, if someone finds this. My name is Rachel Monroe. My daughter Emily is 11. We've been taken. We don't know where we are." She stopped mid-sentence, clearly listening. Her eyes widened. She mouthed the words "he's coming," and then lunged toward the camera, as if to shut it off. The video ended in a sudden burst of static. The third and final video was different. It was entirely in night vision, bathed in that eerie green hue. The camera appeared to be in motion, as though someone, perhaps Emily, was carrying it and filming through a crack in the shelter wall. The footage was blurry, but in the distance, down the length of the tunnel, a figure was visible, tall, unmoving, and facing the camera. It wasn't clear whether it was a man or a mannequin. It just stood there, no facial features, no sound, just stillness. After about 10 seconds, the figure tilted its head slightly to the side. Then the camera dropped, landing sideways on the floor. The clip ended with heavy breathing and a faint whisper, "Don't let him find this." Authorities were stunned. These weren't just videos, they were evidence of captivity and possibly psychological torment. But even with the footage, there were more questions than answers. Who was the man in the tunnel? Why hadn't anyone heard screams or seen signs of forced entry? The storm drain shelter appeared to have been built from the inside, with no obvious external access point. It was almost as if the space had been prepared in advance, waiting. As investigators replayed the clips again and again, one thing became clear: Rachel and Emily hadn't vanished. They'd been hidden, and someone knew exactly where to hide them. Following the discovery of the bunker and the chilling footage, a new wave of investigators, forensic experts, and even federal agents descended upon Red Pine Lake. Every inch of the surrounding area was combed again, this time with heightened urgency. Thermal drones, cadaver dogs, and sonar tech were all deployed. But the deeper they searched, the stranger the case became. It was as if the earth itself had swallowed Rachel and Emily whole. And then, nearly a mile from the storm drain, searchers made another disturbing find: a torn scarf, tangled in the branches of a pine tree, stained with what was confirmed to be Rachel's blood. The scarf was found near the edge of a cliffside clearing, hidden deep within the forest, an area that had been previously marked inaccessible due to erosion. There were no paths, no tire tracks, no signs of human activity, yet the scarf looked freshly torn. Beneath the cliff was a sheer drop into a ravine filled with broken stone. Had Rachel tried to escape and fallen? Had she been chased? Strangely, there were no footprints leading to or from the site, only wind-blown snow and a silence that seemed deliberate. Even more unnerving, a child's handprint was found pressed faintly into the bark of a tree nearby, but no Emily, no Rachel. Just echoes. As the investigation dragged into winter, strange reports began to surface from nearby residents. Fishermen and hikers claimed to hear a child's voice calling out across the frozen lake, late at nights, almost musical, repeating the same 3 words, "Don't forget me." Others claimed to see flickering lights beneath the ice, moving slowly, then vanishing. One man swore he saw a small figure standing at the lake's edge just before dawn when he approached. There was nothing but frost where footsteps should have been. Most chalked it up to cold-induced hallucinations, but some, especially those who knew Rachel, believed it was something else. The town of Ashton Ridge became quieter. Locals avoided the lake altogether. The cabin Rachel had rented sat abandoned, untouched since the spring. And despite the evidence, the FBI eventually downgraded the case to unsolved missing persons, citing lack of suspects, no bodies, and no further leads. Mark Ellison never accepted the outcome. He returned to the lake every month, leaving a red balloon tied to the same tree where Emily's coat was found. "I don't believe she's gone," he told a reporter. "I think she's still here. I think someone or something is keeping her here." To this day, no trace of Rachel or Emily has been officially recovered. The lake remains still, the bunker sealed, but the case lingers like a scar in the quiet town's memory. And every year, as the snow begins to fall, those who live near the water swear they can still hear it just beneath the ice, the faint sound of a child, breathing, waiting, watching, and whispering. So what really happened to Rachel and Emily on that fishing trip? Were they victims of an unspeakable crime, or of something far older and darker that lurks beneath Red Pine Lake? The truth, it seems, remains buried just out of reach. Authorities have closed the case, the cameras have stopped rolling, and the world has moved on. But in Ashton Ridge, the questions still echo through the trees. And every winter, when the lake freezes over and the wind howls through the pines, some say you can still hear a voice, faint and fragile, whispering from beneath the ice. We're still here.
If you liked this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Most importantly, subscribe and hit the bell icon so the next secret finds you first.